I've always been fascinated by all things horror. As a child, I devoured every scary movie I could get my hands on and eagerly delved into books about ghosts, demons, and anything else that lurked in the dark. Little did I know, my fascination with the unknown would soon become a horrifying reality. It all started when my family and I moved into an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. The moment I laid eyes on it, I knew there was something off about the place. The paint was chipping, the windows were cracked, and the air felt thick and heavy. But despite my unease, my parents were excited about the house. They saw it as a project, something they could fix up and make their own. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone in this house. The first night in the new house, I woke up to the sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened intently, trying to brush it off as my imagination. But then I heard the creak of a door and I knew I wasn't alone. I mustered up the courage to slowly peek out of my bedroom door, only to find that no one was there. I went back to bed, convincing myself that it was just the old house settling. But the strange occurrences continued. Doors would open and close on their own, objects would move inexplicably, and I would often wake up to the feeling of someone watching me. I tried to tell my parents, but they brushed off my concerns as irrational fears. One night, I was awoken by a loud crash and a blood-curdling scream. I rushed to my parents' room, only to find them fast asleep. Confused and scared, I cautiously made my way towards the source of the noise. As I approached the kitchen, I could see that all of the cabinets were wide open and dishes were strewn across the floor. But what made my blood run cold was the figure standing in the middle of the chaos. It was a woman, dressed in a white, tattered gown, her long dark hair covering her face. She slowly turned her head towards me, and I could see her eyes were empty sockets. I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips. I could feel her presence in the room, cold and menacing. That was the last straw for my parents. They were convinced that I had imagined it all and, in an attempt to ease my mind, they hired a medium to come to the house and communicate with any spirits that may be present. I was skeptical, but I went along with it. The medium, a frail old woman with kind eyes, walked through the house, speaking to the spirits. I could feel a strange energy in the air as she communed with the other side. Suddenly, she stopped and turned to me, her eyes wide with fear. She whispered, "There's something evil in this house. A dark force that feeds off the fear it creates. You need to leave now." I was too scared to argue. My parents, still skeptical, begrudgingly agreed to move. But before we could even pack our things, the supernatural activity in the house intensified. Objects flew across the room, doors slammed shut, and the temperature would inexplicably drop to freezing levels. It was like a never-ending nightmare. One day, I was home alone, trying to gather my belongings to leave, when I heard a faint voice calling my name. I followed the sound, and it led me to the basement. As I descended the creaky stairs, I could feel the malevolent presence growing stronger. In the corner of the basement, I saw her. The same woman I had seen in the kitchen, but she looked different now. Her face was twisted into a grotesque contortion, her eyes glowing a deep red, and her fingers bony and elongated. I couldn't move. I was frozen with terror as she slowly made her way towards me. In a guttural voice, she spoke, "Now you'll never leave. You're mine." And with that, she lunged at me. I don't remember much after that, only waking up in a hospital bed with my parents by my side. They told me that they had found me unconscious in the basement, and that it was their screams that had brought the neighbors running to help. We never went back to that house, but the memories of that night still haunt me. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that house, but I know one thing for sure: evil lurks in the shadows, waiting for its next victim, and it will stop at nothing to claim it. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night that sets the perfect stage for a horror story. I had always loved horror movies and books, but I never thought I would become the main character in one. It all started when my friends and I decided to take a trip to an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. It was a popular spot for thrill seekers and ghost hunters, and we were eager to explore the supposedly haunted halls. As soon as we arrived, I could sense that something was off. The air felt thick and heavy, and the building itself seemed to emanate an aura of terror. But I brushed it off as nerves and followed my friends inside. The asylum was in a state of decay, with peeling paint, broken windows, and a musty odor that filled the air. We cautiously made our way through the corridors, shining our flashlights into dark corners and jumping at every little noise. As we explored deeper into the building, we came across a room that was full of old medical equipment. It was then that we realized the asylum used to be a mental hospital, and the thought sent shivers down my spine. But things took a darker turn when we stumbled upon a room that had been locked from the outside. It was clear that someone did not want anyone accessing this room, and my curiosity got the best of me. Against my friend's warnings, I picked the lock and pushed open the door. What we saw inside will haunt me for the rest of my life. The room was filled with old photographs and patient files, all dating back to the early 1900s. But what caught our eye was the dark and twisted drawings covering the walls. They depicted terrifying creatures and disturbing scenes, with phrases like, "The voices made me do it," scrawled in blood-red ink. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us, causing us all to jump in fear. We tried to open it, but it was stuck, and it felt like someone was holding it shut from the other side. That's when we heard a deep, guttural growling coming from the room next door. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were cemented to the ground. We were completely trapped, and the growling was getting closer with each passing second. Just when we thought it couldn't get any worse, the lights flickered and went out completely. We were plunged into total darkness, with only our flashlights to guide us. Out of pure desperation, we smashed a window and climbed out, feeling like we were being watched the entire time. The rain was pouring down, but we didn't care. We ran as fast as we could and didn't stop until we were far away from that forsaken place. We never spoke about that night again, and we all tried to forget it ever happened. But the nightmares were constant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something from that asylum had followed us home. The next few weeks were filled with strange occurrences. Objects would move on their own, doors would creak open despite being firmly shut, and I would hear whispers and footsteps when no one else was around. But the scariest thing of all was the figure that I started seeing in the shadows. It was a tall, gaunt figure with sunken eyes and a sinister grin. Whenever I saw it, I felt a sense of dread wash over me, and I knew I wasn't imagining things. I tried to tell my friends, but they didn't believe me. They thought I was just traumatized from our experience at the asylum. But I knew it was real, and I was terrified of what it wanted from me. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a scratching sound coming from my window. I mustered up the courage to look, and my heart froze in fear. There, on the other side of the glass, was the grinning figure. Its bony fingers were clawing at the glass, leaving long scratches behind. I screamed and ran out of my room, knowing that whatever it was, it wanted to hurt me. That was the last straw. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my bags and left town, never looking back. To this day, I still have nightmares about the abandoned asylum and the sinister figure that followed me home. I don't know what it was or what it wanted, but I pray I never encounter it again. Whoever said horror stories aren't real has clearly never been in a situation like this. I learned the hard way that sometimes the scariest things are the ones that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. As I sit here in my cold, dark room, I can hear the sound of distant footsteps approaching. But I know it's not just my imagination playing tricks on me. I've been living in this house for months now, and I still can't shake off the feeling that I'm being watched. It all started when I moved into my new house. It seemed perfect, spacious, affordable, and in a quiet neighborhood. I was excited and couldn't wait to start my new life in this house. But little did I know, this house had a dark, twisted history waiting to be discovered. The first night in the house, I heard a strange scratching sound coming from the wall beside my bed. I brushed it off as rats and went back to sleep. But every night, the scratching continued, almost as if it was trying to communicate with me. I tried to ignore it, but it became harder and harder as the days went by. One night, I woke up to find a figure standing at the end of my bed. It was a woman, dressed in a white gown, her face contorted in an expression of pure terror. I screamed and turned on the lights, but she was gone. I could feel my heart racing and I was covered in cold sweat. Was it just a dream? Or was it something more sinister? That's when I started digging deeper into the history of this house. I found out that the previous owners had moved out suddenly, without any explanation. They claimed that they were experiencing strange occurrences and couldn't take it anymore. But I didn't believe in ghosts, so I didn't think much of it. But things started to escalate. Objects would move on their own. I would hear whispers when I was alone, and sometimes I could feel a cold breath on the back of my neck. I was terrified, but I still refused to believe that this house was haunted. Then, one night, I heard a loud crashing sound coming from the kitchen. I slowly made my way there and found that all the cabinets were open, and the chairs were stacked in a pyramid-like structure. I couldn't explain it. I was alone in the house, and there was no way anyone could have done this. That's when I finally accepted the truth. This house was indeed haunted. I tried to leave, but every time I packed my bags, something would inexplicably stop me. It was like the house didn't want me to leave. I was trapped, and there was no one I could turn to for help. I was living in a nightmare that I couldn't escape from. But the worst was yet to come. One night, as I lay in bed, I saw a dark figure standing in my doorway. It had long, twisted fingers and glowing red eyes. It let out a blood-curdling scream as it slowly moved towards me. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even scream. And just as it reached my bed, it disappeared. After that incident, I couldn't take it anymore. I knew I had to get out of that house. I packed my bags and ran out, never looking back. I've been haunted by nightmares ever since, and the thought of that dark figure still sends shivers down my spine. I don't know what happened in that house, and I don't want to find out. But one thing I know for sure, I will never step foot in that house again. The horrors that I experienced will haunt me for the rest of my life, and I can only pray that no one else falls victim to that house's evil spirits.